The lawyer slid the papers across the scarred oak table, like he was dealing the last hand of a bad poker game. His tie was crooked, his eyes tired. "Gary," he said low, "if the judge leans mother's rights, we might lose." I felt the blood drain out of my face. The fluorescent lights in the Scott County Courthouse buzzed overhead, and somewhere down the hall a door slammed hard enough to rattle the glass. My hands that had fixed broken bed rails and clogged drains at Genesis Medical Center for 25 years were suddenly shaking like I'd never held a wrench in my life. Across from me, Caleb didn't flinch. 17 years old, tall and lanky now, shoulders slightly hunched like he was trying to make himself smaller in a world that always felt too loud. His eyes were steady, the same calm gray blue that used to stare through the living room window when he was 6. He leaned in close, so close I could smell the peppermint gum he always chewed when he was thinking. And he whispered, "Just let her talk." For a second, I didn't understand what he meant. I wanted to grab him by the shoulders and say, talk is how she left. Talk is how she lied. Talk is how she walked out the door 11 years ago and never looked back. But Caleb didn't blink. He didn't raise his voice. He just sat there like a stone in the river, letting the current rush around him, waiting for it to show what it was carrying. My throat tightened. I swallowed hard and looked at our lawyer again. "What do you mean? We might lose." He exhaled, rubbed his forehead. "Family court is unpredictable. You're his stepfather. You did the work, you raised him, but biologically." "Don't say it," I snapped sharper than I meant. My voice echoed off the bare courthouse walls, and I hated myself for it immediately. Caleb's fingers twitched small quick, then went still again on his knee. The lawyer held up a hand. "I'm not insulting you. I'm telling you what the other side is going to argue. Elaine's attorney is going to paint you like you kept her son from her, like you controlled him, like you're sitting on money that belongs to the mother." My stomach rolled. I thought of Elaine's face, makeup, perfect lips, glossy, that practiced tremble in her voice the last time she stood on my porch in the rain. "I just want my son back," she'd said, like she hadn't dropped him off in my lap like an unwanted suitcase. Caleb's whisper echoed in my head again. "Just let her talk." The lawyer leaned forward. "We need to stay calm. Let her testify. Let her attorney run his mouth. Don't react." I looked at Caleb. "Is that what you mean?" Caleb nodded once, slow, certain. That's how part 1 started, right in the middle of the worst moment of my life. Right before the judge walked in. Right before Elaine tried to take what she hadn't earned. But to understand why Caleb's whisper mattered, you need to know what happened the night she left. 11 years ago, Davenport, Iowa smelled like wet asphalt and river wind in late October. The Mississippi was high that week, dark and fast, and the trees along River Drive had started dropping their leaves like they were giving up. I remember because my boots were still damp from work when I came home. I'd been on the night shift at Genesis patching up a leaking pipe behind the surgical wing, the kind of job nobody notices unless you don't do it. My hands reeked of bleach and metal, and my back felt like somebody had driven a nail straight through it. When I walked into the house on West Locust, the lights were on in the kitchen. The radio was playing low, one of those old country stations that faded in and out when the wind was wrong, and Caleb was sitting at the table with his knees pulled up under him, rocking just slightly. He was 6 then, small, skinny, pale like he didn't spend enough time outside. Elaine stood at the counter, her purse already on her shoulder. At first I didn't even register it. I thought she was headed to the grocery store, or the Walgreens on Kimberly to grab something. She used to do that run out late, come back with a bag of nonsense and a story. But then I saw the suitcase by the back door. My chest tightened. "What's going on?" Elaine didn't turn around right away. She kept her eyes on the sink running water that didn't need to be run. "I can't do this anymore, Gary." I laughed once because my brain refused to catch up. "Do what makes spaghetti. It's Thursday." She finally faced me. Her mascara was already done. Her hair was curled. She looked ready, like she'd been getting ready for hours while Caleb sat there holding his breath. "Caleb needs more than I can give," she said like she was reading it off a card. "This house, this life, it's suffocating." I glanced at Caleb. He didn't look at me. He stared at the pattern of the tablecloth, tracing the little squares with his finger. Quiet. Always quiet when the air got tense. "Elaine," I said, trying to keep my voice level, "we just got the diagnosis. We've barely." "Exactly." She cut me off fast. "That diagnosis, autism, therapy, appointments. I didn't sign up for this. I felt like somebody had punched me in the throat. You didn't sign up for your kid. Her jaw clenched. Don't do that. I stepped forward. My boots squeaked on the linoleum. Do what say the truth. She looked past me toward the back window. I followed her eyes and saw headlights in the alley behind our fence. A car idling. My stomach turned cold. You're leaving, I said. Right now. Elaine's voice hardened. I'm going to live my life, Gary. I'm still young. I'm not going to spend the rest of it in doctor's offices and school meetings. How young, I asked before I could stop myself. Her cheeks flushed. That's none of your business. Oh, it's my business, I said, my anger rising like steam. Because you're about to walk out on your son? Caleb rocked a little faster. His breathing changed shorter, quicker. I could see his fingers curling into the edge of the tablecloth, like he was trying to anchor himself. I forced my voice softer. Buddy, I said, it's okay. Elaine grabbed her suitcase handle. He'll be fine with you. With me, I repeated, stunned. Elaine, I'm not. You're good at this stuff, she snapped. You're patient. You. I stared at her. All the little arguments we'd had over the years suddenly lined up like dominoes. Her disappearing at odd hours. The new perfume. The way she'd started saying, I deserve more than she said, I'm sorry. I'll call, she added quickly. Like that made it better. When things settle. I knew in that moment she wouldn't. Elaine, I said, voice cracking, look at him. She didn't. She walked around the table, kissed the top of Caleb's head like he was a dog she was leaving at the vet, and headed for the back door. Caleb didn't cry. He didn't scream. He just stared at the window where the reflection of the kitchen lights made the dark outside look like a wall. The door opened. Cold air rushed in, smelling like rain and river mud. And then it shut. The radio kept playing, some sad song about losing a girl. I stood there frozen. My heart thumped hard in my ears. My hands were still wet from the hospital. I remember looking down at them and thinking, how am I supposed to do this? How am I supposed to raise a kid when I can barely keep my own life together? Caleb whispered, barely audible, Mom. I swallowed hard, blinked fast. Yeah, I said, she's gone for a bit. He stared at the window. She'll come back. I wanted to lie. I wanted to say, yes, buddy, she's just mad she'll be back tomorrow. But something in me, maybe the part that had watched too many people in the ER waiting room get promises they never got, couldn't do it. I pulled out the chair beside him and sat down. The vinyl was cold under my legs. I don't know, I admitted, but I'm here. Caleb's eyes flicked to me for half a second, then back to the window. His fingers kept tracing squares. 1, 2, 3, 4, like he could count his way out of the pain. Outside, the car in the alley pulled away. Tires splashed through a puddle. And that was it. That was the moment my life became something I never planned for. The next morning, I called in late to work and drove Caleb to school. He sat in the passenger seat with his hands tucked into his sleeves, staring straight ahead. The heater blew warm air that smelled faintly like old dust. When I dropped him off, his teacher pulled me aside. We need to talk about his evaluation, she said gently. I nodded like I knew what I was doing. I didn't. The weeks after Elaine left were a blur of appointments and paperwork and bills that seemed to multiply overnight. I spent my lunch breaks on hold with insurance companies. I spent my evenings reading pamphlets from the clinic until the word swam. At church, I sat in the back because I didn't want anyone asking questions. But one Sunday, an older woman named Marlene, she smelled like peppermint and wore a coat that looked older than both of us, pressed a hand into mine. A slip of paper. Support group, she whispered. Tuesday nights, church hall. Coffee's terrible, but the people are decent. I went mostly because I didn't know what else to do. That first Tuesday, I walked into the church hall and got hit with the smell of stale coffee and lemon disinfectant, folding chairs in a circle, a box of donuts that had clearly seen better days. There were parents there who looked like they hadn't slept in years, a grandfather raising his grandson, a mom with tired eyes and a notebook full of therapy schedules. I sat down and kept my mouth shut. Then when it was my turn, the words came out anyway. My name's Gary, I said, and my wife left, and I'm raising her boy. Nobody gasped. Nobody judged. They just nodded like they'd seen this kind of pain before. After the meeting, a man with a Vietnam vet cap, Tom, clapped me on the shoulder. You got a VFW membership, he asked. I've never served, I said. Doesn't matter, he said. We got coffee and we got old guys who know how to fix things. Sometimes that's what a man needs. That's how I ended up at VFW Post 2107 on a Friday fish fry, watching Caleb sit quietly at a corner table with a plate of fries, listening to the hum of old men laughing and arguing about the Cubs like it was life or death. Tom leaned in and said, "You keep every receipt, Gary. Every letter. Every dang thing. Trust me." I didn't understand why then, but I listened. Because when your world falls apart, you start grabbing whatever advice feels solid. And that's what I did for the next 11 years. I stayed. I learned Caleb's rhythms. The way he needed his socks folded just so. The way loud grocery stores made his shoulders tighten. The way he could calm down if we sat in the truck for 5 minutes and listened to the engine idle. I learned to talk to him without crowding him. Learned to give him space without letting him drift away. And slowly, he started to grow. Not into the kind of kid who cracks jokes at the dinner table or throws a baseball in the yard, but into a kid who noticed everything. A kid who remembered dates and patterns. A kid who, when I thought I was drowning, quietly started building a raft out of details. I didn't see it at the time. All I saw was my own exhaustion, my own fear, my own anger that never fully left. And when Caleb turned 17 and his little computer project suddenly became worth $3.7 million, that anger came back in a different form. Because money doesn't just buy comfort, it buys attention. And the kind of people who abandon you, they have a way of smelling attention like blood in the water. So when Elaine showed up again, this time in the rain with a lawyer and a smile that didn't reach her eyes, my first instinct wasn't revenge. It was panic. And now, sitting in that courthouse room with the buzzing lights and the scarred table, hearing our lawyer say we might lose, I realized something that made my stomach drop even harder. I had stayed for 11 years, but I hadn't prepared for war. Caleb had, and all he asked from me was one thing. Just let her talk. The first time Caleb's laptop died, it did it quietly. No sparks, no smoke, just a soft click and a black screen that refused to come back no matter how many times he pressed the power button. It was a Tuesday night in February. Snow piled up along West Locust Street in dirty gray banks, and the furnace was rattling like it might quit any minute. I was at the kitchen table balancing a checkbook that never balanced, while Caleb sat across from me, shoulders hunched, eyes locked on the screen. He pressed the button again. Nothing. He froze. Not panicked, not angry, just frozen, like the world had stopped mid-sentence. "Hey," I said gently, "what's wrong?" He swallowed. "It's not responding." I leaned over, squinting at the screen like that would help. "Maybe it just needs a restart." "I already did that," he said a little sharper than usual. Then he caught himself. "Sorry." "It's okay," I said quickly. "We'll figure it out." But when I opened the back panel, my heart sank. The thing was held together with mismatched screws and hope. A pawn shop special we'd bought 2 years earlier, with cash I'd pulled out of an envelope labeled "Emergency Only." "Can it be fixed?" he asked. I hesitated just a second too long. Caleb noticed everything. "Yes," I said anyway, "probably." That night after he went to bed, I sat at the table with the laptop guts spread out like a patient on an operating tray. The smell of burnt dust filled the kitchen. I rubbed my eyes and stared at the cracked circuit board. I didn't have the money for a new one. Not even close. So the next day I took my lunch break at Genesis and walked down to the maintenance storage room. The old one. The place where broken monitors and outdated machines went to die. Gary, my supervisor, said when he saw me digging through a bin, "What are you looking for?" "Anything with a working hard drive," I said. "Long story." He sighed. "Take whatever you want. Just don't tell it." That night I came home smelling like machine oil and dust. Caleb watched from the doorway as I laid out the salvage parts on the table. "You don't have to do this," he said. "I do," I replied. "Sit." He sat. For 3 hours we worked in silence except for the ticking of the wall clock and the occasional hum of a truck passing outside. I soldered. He watched. Then quietly he pointed. "That one goes there." I followed his finger. He was right. When the screen finally flickered back to life, he let out a breath I didn't realize he'd been holding. "Thank you," he said. That was the first time I understood something important. Caleb didn't just like computers. He saw them. Back then, the app didn't have a name. It was just folders and notes and sketches taped to the wall with blue painter's tape. Caleb would come home from school, eat the same peanut butter sandwich he ate every day, then disappear into his room. Sometimes I'd hear nothing but typing. Other times I'd hear him pacing, counting under his breath. 1, 2, 3, 4. What are you working on? I asked once, leaning against his doorframe. A way to make stores quieter, he said. I frowned. You mean headphones? No, he said patiently. Patterns. He explained it slowly, like he was afraid I'd get lost. The app broke down big, overwhelming places, grocery stores, schools, bus stations into steps. Visual paths, gentle reminders. A way to know what came next so the noise didn't take over your head. I didn't understand the code, but I understood the need. I'd seen him shut down in the cereal aisle at Hy-Vee when a kid screamed 2 rows over. Seen his hands shake when the fluorescent lights buzzed too loud. If this thing could help him, maybe it could help someone else too. The first time he tried to show it to anyone outside the house was at the Davenport Public Library, a small community tech night, folding tables, coffee and foam cups. Half the people there looked like they'd wandered in by mistake. Caleb stood behind the table, eyes glued to the floor. You want me to talk? I asked. He shook his head. I can. He cleared his throat. This is, a scheduling and navigation tool for people with sensory processing issues. The laptop froze halfway through the demo. I felt my stomach drop. Caleb stared at the screen, breathing fast. His fingers fluttered, then stopped. He closed the laptop slowly. I'm sorry, he said. It didn't. That's okay, a woman said kindly. Technology does that. But I could see it on his face. The disappointment. The way he folded in on himself like he was bracing for impact. That night, he didn't touch the app. 2 weeks passed, then 3. I found him one evening, sitting on his bed, staring at his hands. You quitting? I asked softly. He shrugged. Maybe it's stupid. No, I said firmly. It's not. He looked up. How do you know? I thought about the nights I'd come home exhausted, my back screaming, my hands raw from chemicals, and still cook dinner because somebody needed me to. Because stupid things don't help people, I said, and this helps you. The next morning, I made a decision that scared the hell out of me. I sold my truck. A 2004 Ford F-150 with rusted wheel wells and a cracked dashboard, but it ran. It had hauled lumber hospital equipment and more groceries than I could count. I sold it for less than it was worth and bought Caleb a refurbished laptop that didn't wheeze when it turned on. When I handed it to him, he stared at me like I'd just given him the moon. You need the truck, he said. I can walk, I replied. You can't replace time. He hugged me then, awkward, brief, but real. Things changed fast after that. Not overnight, not in some movie montage way, but enough. Caleb refined the app, gave it a name, Symmetry, entered a small competition in Des Moines, didn't win first place but got noticed. A month later, the Quad City Times ran a short piece on page 4. Local teen develops app for neurodivergent users. I cut it out and taped it to the fridge. Then came the email. Then the call. Then the meeting at a coffee shop near the river where a man in a blazer talked about valuation and user growth like he was ordering lunch. When the number came up $3.7 million, I felt dizzy. Caleb just nodded. We didn't celebrate. We got a lawyer. A quiet one, older than me, wore the same brown suit every time. He talked about structures and protection and said something that stuck with me. Money doesn't change people, he said. It reveals them. That night, I opened a file folder and wrote a label on it with a black marker. Caleb, Kearney everything. I didn't know it yet, but that folder would become the most important thing I ever owned. Because a week later, when the certified letter arrived, it wasn't from an investor. It was from Elaine. Elaine didn't knock the first time she came back. She stood on my porch in the rain like she owned the place, like she'd just stepped out for a smoke and finally decided to come back in. Her hair was darker than I remembered. Her coat was clean and expensive looking, the kind of coat you don't wear unless you expect people to notice. I opened the door and the cold rushed in, carrying the smell of wet pavement and river wind. Gary, she said soft. Careful, can we talk? Behind me, I felt it before I heard it. Caleb's bedroom door creaking open just a fraction. I think we've done enough talking for one lifetime, I said. Elaine glanced past me into the house, her eyes moving fast, measuring. I just want to see him. He's not a dog, I said. You don't just stop by. Her jaw tightened. I'm his mother. That word hit like a hammer. I stepped outside and pulled the door shut behind me. Rain soaked through my jacket, immediately cold against my back. 11 years, I said quietly. You don't get to use that word like it's new. Elaine sighed and looked away like I was exhausting. I wasn't in a good place back then. You weren't in any place, I snapped. You left. I left because I was drowning, she shot back. You think it was easy being trapped in a house with a child who… Stop, I said sharply. My hands curled into fists. Don't finish that sentence. She pressed her lips together, then softened her voice again. I'm better now. I've done a lot of work on myself. I almost laughed. Behind the door, I heard nothing. That scared me more than noise would have. You don't get to work on yourself by abandoning your kid, I said. You don't get to show up now and pretend this is some healing journey. Elaine's eyes hardened. I'm not pretending. I'm reclaiming what's mine. There it was. I opened the door and stepped back inside without another word. Elaine hesitated, then followed, shaking water off her coat like she was settling in. Caleb stood in the hallway, half hidden, his face pale but unreadable. Hi, sweetheart, Elaine said, forcing a smile. You've grown so much. Caleb didn't answer. His eyes flicked from her face to the floor and stayed there. Elaine cleared her throat. I've been thinking a lot about you. Funny, I said. We haven't heard from you. She waved a hand. Gary, please. I didn't come here to fight. No, I said. You came here to look. Her gaze slid toward the kitchen, the hallway, the fridge with the Quad City Times clipping still taped to it. She stopped on that. Her eyes sharpened. What's that? She asked. None of your business, I said. She smiled slow and thin. It looks like my son's name. My chest tightened. I felt the shift then, the exact moment curiosity turned into calculation. I should go, she said, finally stepping back toward the door. But I'll be in touch. No, I said, you won't. She paused at the threshold and looked back at Caleb. I missed you, she said softly. Caleb didn't move. The door closed. The rain swallowed her footsteps. I leaned my forehead against the doorframe, my heart pounding so hard it made my ears ring. Behind me, Caleb spoke, his voice flat. She's lying. I turned. You sure? He nodded. Her breathing changed. I stared at him. What? When she talks about feelings, he said matter of fact, she breathes faster. When she talks about things she wants, she doesn't. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. The letter from her lawyer arrived 3 days later. Formal, polite, aggressive without ever raising its voice. Ms. Whitmore seeks to reestablish a relationship with her son and address certain financial matters related to his recent business activities. My hands shook as I read it, the words blurred. Financial matters. I called the attorney we'd used for the trust and sat across from him in a small office that smelled like dust and burnt coffee. He read the letter twice, then leaned back in his chair. She's going after control, he said. Can she do that? I asked. He hesitated. That hesitation was worse than any answer. You're his stepfather, he said carefully. You did everything right morally, legally. It's complicated. I swallowed. Say it. If the judge prioritizes biological ties, he said we could lose decision-making authority over the funds. Not all of it, but enough. My stomach dropped. After everything. He spread his hands. Family court doesn't always reward sacrifice, especially undocumented sacrifice. That night I didn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan as it clicked unevenly, every sound too loud. I imagined a judge's gavel coming down. Imagined Caleb being forced into meetings with Elaine. Imagined her hands on money she never earned. I dreamed she was smiling while everything I built burned down. When morning came, my hands were cold and numb. Caleb sat at the kitchen table sorting papers. What are you doing? I asked. Organizing, he said. For what? He looked up at me, calm, steady. For court. My chest tightened. Caleb, this isn't your job. This is adult stuff. He tilted his head. I am almost an adult. That's not what I mean. He pushed a stack of papers toward me. Printed emails, voicemails transcribed, dates, times. Did you keep all this? I asked. Yes. Why? He paused, choosing his words carefully. Because she said once, don't call me again unless there's money. My breath caught. When 6 years ago, he said, I remembered. I sat down hard in the chair. Elaine hadn't just abandoned him. She'd taught him something. that people tell the truth eventually if you let them talk long enough. And suddenly his whisper in the courthouse made terrifying sense. I didn't want to believe that my 17-year-old stepson had been preparing for this longer than I had. It bruised my pride in a way I didn't expect. We sat at the kitchen table that night, the same table where Elaine had once packed her suitcase and walked out like she was late for a flight. The overhead light flickered, something I kept meaning to fix, and a stack of folders sat between us. Manila, labeled in Caleb's precise handwriting. Dates, names, places. This one, he said, sliding a folder toward me, as emails. I opened it. Printed messages, single-spaced, highlighted in yellow. Some were short, some were cruel in their efficiency. I can't handle this right now. Please stop contacting me. You chose this, Gary. My chest tightened. I didn't remember half of them. Not because they hadn't happened, but because I'd shoved them so far down, I'd almost convinced myself Elaine had simply vanished. This one, Caleb continued tapping another folder, is voicemail transcripts. You transcribed them, I asked. Yes, he said. The audio was distorted. It was easier to read. I picked one at random. Date March 15, 2017, time 2:32 p.m., Elaine Whitmore. I don't want this responsibility. Please don't call me again. I closed my eyes. All those years I thought I was protecting Caleb by not reminding him, by not letting him hear her voice. Turns out he'd heard it anyway. You shouldn't have had to do this, I said quietly. Caleb shrugged. I didn't mind. That scared me, because it told me something about how early he'd learned not to rely on anyone else. The next few weeks blurred together. Meetings, emails, phone calls that always seemed to end with, "We'll see what the judge says." Elaine's lawyer was good, young, confident. He spoke in calm, reassuring tones, like this was all just a misunderstanding that could be smoothed over with the right paperwork. Elaine leaned into that image hard. When we ran into her at a pre-hearing conference room, she wore a soft sweater and no jewelry. She looked tired, fragile. I just want what's best for my son, she said, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. I felt my hands curl under the table. Caleb sat beside me, hands folded, eyes on the carpet. Elaine's lawyer smiled at him. Caleb, we're so proud of what you've accomplished. Your mother has followed your journey from afar. Caleb looked up. No, he said. The room went quiet. No, the lawyer repeated, still smiling. She hasn't, Caleb said calmly. If she had, she would know my app is in the game. Elaine stiffened. Sweetheart, it's licensed software, Caleb continued, his voice even. Used by schools and clinics. It helps people like me. Please don't minimize it. The lawyer blinked just for a second. I bit the inside of my cheek to keep from smiling. Later, outside in the parking lot, I pulled Caleb aside. You okay? He nodded. She talks too much. What do you mean? She explains herself when no one asks, he said. People who tell the truth don't do that. I stared at him. He wasn't angry. He wasn't plotting revenge. He was observing a pattern. Still, I almost ruined everything. It happened on a Friday night at the VFW. Fish fry, long tables. The smell of grease and coffee thick in the air. Tom slid me a beer and shook his head. She's got nerve, he said. You should have adopted the boy back then. I know, I muttered. You could go public, another guy chimed in. Facebook eats this stuff up. For a moment, the idea tempted me. Post the emails, post the voicemails. Let the town see who Elaine really was. I went home, fired up phone in my hand. Caleb was at his desk typing. I'm thinking of posting something, I said. He stopped, slowly turned around. That would be a mistake, he said. I bristled. She's dragging us into court. Yes, he agreed, where there are rules. I exhaled sharply. I'm tired of rules. Caleb stood up, walked over, looked me straight in the eye. Dad, he said, rarely used, always deliberate data only works if it stays clean. The word dad hit harder than anything Elaine's lawyer had said. I lowered the phone. That night I lay awake listening to the river wind rattle the windows, realizing how close I'd come to letting anger burn down the very case that might save us. 2 days before the hearing, Elaine filed for an emergency motion. Our lawyer called me at work. They're trying to accelerate. My hands went numb. Is that bad? It's pressure, he said. They want to catch us off balance. I drove home in a fog, convinced this was the moment everything fell apart. Caleb met me at the door. It's okay, he said before I even spoke. Or how do you know? They're rushing, he replied. That means they're guessing. I sank onto the couch. What if the judge sides with her anyway? Caleb thought for a moment. Then he said something I'll never forget. Then we'll still have the truth, he said. And the truth is patient. For the first time since Elaine came back, I felt something loosen in my chest. I still didn't know how this would end. But I knew one thing for certain. Elaine was walking into a courtroom with stories. Caleb was walking in with records. And all I had to do, the hardest thing I'd ever done in my life, was stay quiet. The Scott County Courthouse always smelled faintly of old paper and floor polish. That morning it smelled like sweat and nerves. The courtroom was already half full when we walked in. Local faces, a couple people from church, one of the guys from the VFW sitting in the back with his arms crossed like he was guarding the place. Word travels fast in a town like Davenport, especially when money and family get tangled together. Elaine sat at the opposite table, back straight, hands folded neatly in her lap. Her lawyer leaned in close, whispering something that made her nod at just the right moments. She looked calm, composed, like she belonged there. I didn't. My knee bounced under the table. My palms were damp. Every creak of the wooden benches sounded like thunder in my ears. I kept thinking about one thing and one thing only. I am not his biological father. That sentence ran through my head like a bad song you can't shut off. The judge entered. We stood, sat. The gavel came down with a sharp crack that echoed off the walls and into my chest. Elaine's lawyer went first. He painted a careful picture. A mother who'd made mistakes, a woman who'd struggled, a parent who'd been kept at a distance while her son's life and fortune had grown without her. She only wants what's best for her child, he said smoothly, pacing just enough to look sincere. And she believes she should have a say in decisions involving his future. Elaine dabbed her eyes at just the right time. I clenched my jaw. Then Elaine took the stand. She spoke softly, carefully, about mental health, about being lost, about finding her way back. I never stopped loving my son, she said, voice trembling. I thought giving him space was the right thing. I almost stood up. I could feel the heat rising in my chest, the words clawing their way up my throat. But I didn't move. I remembered the whisper. Just let her talk. Elaine talked about birthdays she couldn't quite place, schools she named wrong, therapies she said she supported but couldn't describe. Her lawyer guided her, gently steering her away from details, keeping things broad, safe. Then it was our turn. Our lawyer stood, adjusted his glasses, and asked one simple question. Mrs. Whitmore, when was the last time you attended one of Caleb's therapy sessions? Elaine blinked. Well, it's been a while. How long? She hesitated. Several years. Can you be more specific? She shifted in her seat. I don't recall the exact date. Our lawyer nodded. Do you recall his therapist's name? Elaine opened her mouth, closed it. There were several. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. My heart hammered. The lawyer continued, calm as a man reading a grocery list. Mrs. Whitmore, are you aware that Caleb has a documented allergy to peanuts? Elaine frowned. He never had allergies as a child. Caleb's shoulders stiffened beside me. Our lawyer didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Mrs. Whitmore, he said, would you be surprised to learn that his school and medical records list that allergy consistently for over a decade? Elaine's eyes flicked toward her lawyer. Too late. The judge leaned forward slightly. Then Caleb was called. He walked to the stand without hesitation, sat, adjusted the microphone with careful hands. Please state your name, the judge said. Caleb Whitmore, he replied. His voice was steady, clear. Elaine smiled at him, hopeful. It didn't reach his eyes. Caleb didn't look at her when he spoke. He looked at the judge. I brought records, he said simply. He handed over a neatly organized stack of documents. Emails, transcripts, logs. Dates, times, facts. Our lawyer guided him gently. Caleb, can you explain why you kept these? Yes, Caleb said, because consistency matters. Elaine shifted in her chair. Caleb continued, unflinching. On March 15th, 2017, at 2:32 p.m., my mother left a voicemail stating she did not want responsibility and asked not to be contacted again. Elaine's lawyer jumped up. Objection? The judge raised a hand, overruled. Caleb read the words without emotion. No bitterness, no anger. Just truth. The room went quiet. Elaine's face drained of color. Then came the email, the one where she'd written you chose this Gary. Then another and another. Elaine started shaking her head. That's out of context. Caleb tilted his head slightly. There is no context where that statement implies support. I felt tears sting my eyes. Not because she was losing, but because he was standing there calm, measured, unbreakable. The judge looked at Elaine. Mrs. Whitmore, do you dispute the authenticity of these records? Elaine opened her mouth. Closed it. No, she whispered. The silence that followed felt heavy, earned. When the ruling came, it was almost anticlimactic. The judge denied Elaine's request for control over Caleb's assets, ordered her to cover a portion of court costs, issued a warning about future filings without merit. Elaine stared straight ahead as the gavel fell. It was over. Outside on the courthouse steps, the cold air hit my face like freedom. Elaine walked past us without a word, her heels clicking sharp against the stone. No tears, no goodbye. Just empty space where accountability finally caught up. Caleb turned to me. Are you okay? He asked. I nodded, my throat tight. Yeah. I meant it. For the first time in a long time, I really meant it. The Mississippi was low that spring, wide and calm, sliding past Davenport like it had all the time in the world. A week after the ruling, Caleb and I walked the river path just after sunrise. The air was cool enough to sting a little, the kind of cold that wakes you up instead of wearing you down. I carried 2 cups of coffee from the Casey's on River Drive, mine black, his with too much cream. We didn't talk much at first. That's how it's always been with us. Silence wasn't something to be afraid of. It was a place we both knew how to stand. Across the water, the early sun hit the rusted rail bridge, turning it orange for a few seconds before the light shifted again. I watched Caleb walk a half step ahead of me, hands in his jacket pockets, counting his strides without realizing it. Do you ever think about her? I asked. He stopped. Not abruptly, just paused, like he was considering a question that deserved an honest answer. Yes, he said, but not the way I used to. How's that? He looked out at the river. I don't wonder why she left anymore. I only noticed that she stayed gone. I nodded. That made sense. We sat on a bench near the bend in the path. A jogger passed us, earbuds, lost in his own world. Somewhere behind us, a freight train blew its horn long and low, the sound rolling across the water like a memory. I took a sip of coffee and winced. Burnt. Too hot. Casey's coffee never changed. I keep thinking I said about all the times I almost messed this up. Caleb glanced at me. You didn't. I almost did, I said, posting things, yelling, trying to fight her the loud way. He thought about that. You were angry. I was scared, I corrected. There's a difference. He nodded once. Anger is loud, fear is busy. I smiled despite myself. You should write fortune cookies. A corner of his mouth twitched. With Caleb, that counted as a grin. We sat there a while longer, watching the water slide past like it always had. Same river, same town, different weight on my chest. Later that week, Caleb asked if we could use the church hall on Tuesday nights. For what, I asked. A meeting, he said, for kids like me and their parents. I blinked. You want to run a support group? Yes, he said simply. There's a need. So we did. We set up folding chairs, made bad coffee, labeled a cardboard box donations and stuck it by the door. Caleb talked about routines and tools. I talked about paperwork and patience, about staying when leaving would have been easier. The first night, 6 people showed up. The second week, there were 12. A month later, Caleb used part of the money from Symmetry to start a small scholarship fund. Nothing flashy, just enough to help kids like him get the tools they needed without begging for them. When someone asked him why he didn't go bigger, national programs, big press, he shook his head. This is where I live, he said. It's enough. One evening, as we locked up the hall, I finally asked the question that had been sitting in my chest since the courthouse. How did you know? I said, back then, when you told me to let her talk. Caleb slipped the keys into his pocket and looked at me. Because, he said carefully, people who lie explain themselves. People who tell the truth don't need to. I felt something settle inside me at that. All those years I thought staying meant doing more, working harder, fixing everything with my hands. Turns out staying also meant knowing when not to interrupt. Elaine never came back. No apology, no second attempt. And that was fine, because family isn't who shows up when there's money on the table. It's who stays when the lights are off, the bills are due, and nobody's watching. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been the one who stayed when walking away would have been easier, I hope you'll take a second to reflect on that strength. Share this story with someone who understands it. And if you'd like to hear more real grounded stories like this one, consider subscribing. Some truths don't need shouting. They just need time.